Hey guys, it's Steven here, and I'm back with another tutorial on using autolayout, programmatically using autolayout. So this is pretty much just a follow-up of the last tutorial, which showed you guys how to create autolayout constraints to lay out your view hierarchy. So at the end of the last tutorial, I said that there was another way to create these constraints, which is a much more convenient way than what we did previously. And I'm going to go ahead in this tutorial and show you a few examples. So let's just go over what we did last time. So if I go and run the code, you can see a very simple view hierarchy here. So you have a red view and you have a blue view. The red view is 100 by 100 in width and height, and the blue view is 200 by 200. You have them both centered on the screen, centered horizontally, and you have the blue view centered vertically on the screen, and the red view is right above the blue view. So what we'll do in this tutorial is we'll go ahead and recreate all of these constraints, except with a different method. And in my opinion, that method is a more convenient method. So let me go ahead and show you guys how to do that. So I'll just start off with some simple examples. So I'll quit the simulator, and I'll comment out this setup view method, and I'll create another method. So I'll call this setup view with visual format, which is the other way that we're going to go ahead and create the constraints. And in init with frame, I will call this method. So right now this will do nothing, but let's go ahead and set up our views. So I'll do exactly the same as before. I'll create a blue view, and actually I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this code. So I've got my blue view, and I'll add it as a subview. And then I've got my red view. Okay, so I've got my two views. And I've called setup view with visual format, which is this method. So the views are added to the view hierarchy. And what happens if we run this code? Well, nothing, because we haven't given the view any constraints, so we can't actually see anything. So next up, let's go ahead and give the view some constraints. So previously, the way that we created the constraints was using this method, which is NSLayoutConstraint, and then basically we give the init method of this NSLayoutConstraint some arguments, and it would go ahead and create a constraint. But this is very tedious to type out every single time, and the question is, can we do better? And yes, we can. So how can we do better? Well, let's go ahead and create some constraints using the visual format method. So the visual format method is basically kind of like a meta language defined by Apple, which you specify a string about how you want to lay out your views, and then it will go and create the constraints for you. Let me just go ahead and show you. It's much easier to show you than to try and explain it. So for starters, let's just say I want to create a red view that is 100 in width and 100 in height. So let me go ahead and do that. So the first thing that you have to do with this style of creating the constraints is you have to define a view dictionary. And basically what that means is you have to define a dictionary of strings to UI view objects. So strings as keys and UI view objects as your values. So let me go ahead and do that. So here I've got red view as the key, and I've got red view as the UI view value, and the next key I've got blue view, and I'm going to use blue view as the value. And in the future I'm going to use this views dictionary to create the constraints, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So to create a red view of 100 by 100, let me just go and create the constraints for that. So I'll call this red view horizontal constraints. And instead of calling this NSLayoutConstraint with the initializer method that you see up here, I'm going to call it with a class method. So this class method on NSLayoutConstraint is basically a factory method in which you pass in some arguments, and it would return you a NSLayoutConstraint object. And basically this NSLayoutConstraint object gets added to the view, and then the view knows how to lay out its constraints. So let's go ahead and create the red view constraint of 100 by 100. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the horizontal constraint, and I want the red view to be 100 in width. So how do I do that? Well, the first argument to this method is the format string. The format string is essentially the definition of how you want to lay out your view. So let me go ahead and show you how to do that. So the string is basically, I started off with saying h, colon, and bar, and that's basically what that's saying is h means it's a horizontal constraint, and colon means now the definition of how I want to lay out my views is going to come afterwards. So bar, vertical bar, what does that mean? Well, that means that I want whatever to come after the vertical bar to be on the very left side of the super view. So I'll provide an example of how to do that. So the next thing I want after the super view is the red view. So I just go ahead and type red view. And this value here is basically coming from the views dictionary. So I said red view is self.redView. So this key corresponds to this value, and by typing red view over here, the auto layout library is going to know to look into this dictionary and reference this view. So I'm going to type red view, and I'll give a vertical bar again. And the second and third arguments of this method is optional, so you can provide null values for it, and I'll come back and explain what they do later. But basically, the fourth argument to this method is a views dictionary, and basically it's this dictionary that we've defined over here. So if I paste this in, what this is saying is give me a horizontal constraint for the red view. So I want it to start at the very left of its super view and to end at the very right of its super view. So what this should do is that it should stretch the red view from the very left of the super view to the very right of the super view. Let me go ahead and create the vertical constraint for the red view. And I'm going to do something very similar, except this time instead of h colon, I'll type v colon. And basically what this means is that I am now defining a vertical constraint. So similarly, I'm going to say I want the top of the super view to have the red view coming right after it. And I want this red view to end at the bottom of its super view, which is denoted by another vertical bar. Once again, I'm going to type null for the second and third options and pass it in the views dictionary for the last option. So next, all there is left to do is to add these constraints to the super view. So if I do self.add constraints, red view horizontal constraint, and self.add constraints, red view vertical constraint, and I go ahead and run this code, and you'll see that the string is filled up with just one giant red view, and that is really what we're expecting here, because the constraints that I defined was a horizontal constraint with a vertical bar, which was basically saying this bar over here, the very left of the super view, and then I want the red view to follow right afterwards, and I want it to go exactly to the end of its super view, denoted by the second bar over here. And similarly, in the vertical constraint, I have the top bar, which is this bar over here, and then I have red view, and then I have another vertical bar, which is basically saying the bottom of the super view, and this is why this red view is extending to the bottom of the super view. So earlier I said that I want the red view to be 100 by 100. So how do we do that? Well, it's actually super simple. Basically, after you specify the red view in brackets, you just specify the horizontal length of the red view, and which is 100. And over here, I just specify the vertical length of the red view, which is also 100. So now, what is this saying? Well, it's saying that I want a horizontal constraint for the red view, and I want it to start to the very left of my super view, and then I want a red view of 100 by width, which would be probably end at around about here where the cursor is. And then I want the red view to continue until the end of my super view. And that doesn't really make sense, because I want the rid view's width to be 100, but I also want it to stretch to the end of the super view. So what's going to happen? Well, let's go ahead and try it out. And as you can see, it did work, but you just get this whole load of warnings in the console, and basically this is a debug message telling you what is actually wrong with your constraints, and it has a list of all your constraints, and it says one of these constraints are conflicting, and basically it has to choose one constraint over the other. So the SDK is just going to choose one constraint, and then it's going to apply that constraint and ignore the other constraint. But if you see something like this in the console, you should definitely go in and fix it up. So to fix this up, basically we have to provide a valid constraint. So let's just say we want the rid view to start at the very left of the super view, and to be in 100 in length, and then to basically end. So all I have to do is remove the vertical bar. After removing the vertical bar, I do not have that restriction saying that I want the rid view to be ending at the right of the super view. Similarly, let me go and remove the vertical bar for the vertical constraint, and let's give that another go. And there you have it. You have a rid view of 100 by 100, and it's starting at the beginning positions with the vertical bars, and you don't see any weird debug messages in the console. So let's go around and play with this a little bit. So what would happen if I put the vertical bar at the end of this constraint? Well, basically what this is saying is, in the horizontal constraint, is it's basically saying I want a rid view of 100 in length horizontally, and I want it to align it with the right end of my super view. So with this constraint, we should really see the rid view at this side of the screen. So let's give that a go. And as you can see, that's exactly what happened. What would happen if we remove this vertical bar and we place the vertical bar at the end of this? Well, then the rid view should be at this corner over here. So let's go ahead and give that a go. And as you can see, that's the expected outcome. So let's go ahead and provide a few more examples. So I'm just going to remove these vertical bars and place it at the front. So with these two constraints, I'm basically saying I want a rid view of 100 and 100 at the origin of its super view. But sometimes you might want to have a little bit of space between the origin and the rid view. So let's go ahead and do that. So what if, say, I wanted to have the start of my view, and then I wanted to leave a 50 pixels in space before I want to see the rid view? It's super easy to do that. All I have to do is do this. And this is super easy to read, right? So basically what this is saying is that I want this to be the start of my view, and then I want 50 pixels of space, and then I want my rid view, which is 100 pixels in width. So let's go ahead and check that out. And that's exactly what happened. I have 50 pixels in space, and then I have my rid view. Let's go ahead and give some vertical spacing as well. So now, once again, this reads like this. So I have my vertical constraint, which is the start of my super view, and then I want 100 pixels in space, and then I want the rid view, which is 100 pixels in length. So let's go ahead and see that. And as you can see, the rid view has now shifted down by 100 pixels. So some other examples, let's say, so most of these examples we've defined the height and the width of the rid view to be 100 by 100. You don't actually have to do that. So let me go and show you. If I remove the width of the rid view and I did something like this, so how would we read this? Well, basically it says I want the start of my super view, and then I want 50 pixels in space, and then I want my rid view, and then I want 50 pixels in space from the end of my super view. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a rid view, and then it's going to leave 50 pixels of space on the left and the right of its super view. So let's just go ahead and see the results. And yeah, here it is. So I've got 50 pixels of space from the beginning of my super view to the start of my red view, and then I've got 50 pixels in space from the from the end of my super view to my red view. What happens if you don't provide a value at all over here? If we just had a bar? Well, previously, remember, if we had a bar, it's basically saying stretch the view to the end of the bar. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to say we want 50 pixels in space, and then we want the red view to be stretched all the way to the end of its super view. So let's go ahead and see that. And there you go. You have 50 pixels of space, and you have the red view, which is stretched to the length of the rest of the super view. So that's all pretty straightforward, and I think this is like a lot easier to define than something like this, which can be very tedious. You might also want to have a look at the signature of this method, constraints with visual format. And as you can see, this is a class function, but see the return value, it's an array of any object. And basically what it's actually returning is an array of NSLayoutConstraint objects. Whereas up here, you were calling the initializer for the NSLayoutConstraint. So when you create it this way, you only create a single NSLayoutConstraint. But when you do something, when you create it this way, basically you specify the format string, and the SDK figures out what kind of visual constraint you want. It can create 2 or maybe 3 constraint objects and returns them an array. Because you can do some pretty complicated stuff, like there's no way that you can write something like this using only a single one of these initializer methods. You'd probably have to create two of them at least. And that's why when you add these constraints, you call the addConstraints method, which takes in an array of constraints, which is created from this method over here. And next up, I'll just talk about the third parameter to this method, which is the metrics. And that's basically a way to define like your length variables outside this string. So what does that mean? Well, you see this number 50 over here. I can actually define it as a variable in this class and pass it into the string through this metrics method. And how do I do that? Well, let me go ahead and show you. So if I define another dictionary called metrics, and it's similar to the views dictionary, but this time instead of the value being a UI view, the value would just be an NS number object. So say if I wanted to call this metric left padding, and I'm going to give it a value of 50. And similarly, I'll create another metric over here called a top padding. And this time I will give it a value of 100. And if I pass this metrics object into the arguments of the factory method, I can then go and substitute these numbers for these values. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll say left padding, and I'll say top padding, and the vertical constraint. And if I run this, I should see exactly the same thing. And there you have it. Nothing has changed. If I then go and change the top padding to say 200 instead of 100, I should see the red view move another 100 pixels down, which is exactly what has happened. So this is pretty straightforward, and you can do a lot of stuff with this because essentially you can make these variables instance methods, and you can share them across multiple constraints. So that's a pretty convenient thing to do over there. So that's pretty much the basics of this visual constraints meta language definition method of creating constraints. Let's go ahead and create what we originally had in setup view. So let's just go and take another look at that. Alright, so let's go ahead and create this. So basically, we will revisit the constraints. So basically, this is a blue view, which is 200 by 200, and it's centered vertically and centered horizontally, and then you have the red view right above it, and it's 100 by 100. So let's go ahead and do that. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, let's go ahead and remove some of the code that we've written so far. Those were just pretty much examples to show you guys how to write this kind of definition to lay out your views. And let's go ahead and try to replicate what we did before. So previously so let's go ahead and try to write the constraints for the blue view first. So previously we wanted a blue view of 200 by 200. So let's go ahead and do that first. So I'm going to create the blue view horizontal constraint. And once again, I'm going to go and call the factory method. And I'm going to say I want a horizontal constraint for the blue view, and I want it to be 200 in length. And that's it. And basically what I've done here is what I've done up here. It's going to generate the exact same constraint, but it's much easier to type and also much easier to read. Instead of having to give the blue view and say the width is equal to not an attribute and a constant of 200, I can just type this, and instantly I can read this and say, oh, I've got a horizontal constraint, I've got a blue view, and I've got 200 in width. And that's very easy to do. So next, let's go and create the blue view vertical constraint. And similarly, all I'm saying is I want a vertical constraint. I want the blue view, and I want it to be 200 in length. And the second and third arguments are going to be nil, and I'll pass in the views dictionary. So let's go ahead and add these constraints to our view hierarchy. And notice here that I haven't really said where I wanted the blue view to begin or to end. See, I didn't have that vertical bar that I had in the previous examples. So the view hierarchy doesn't actually know where the blue view should begin and where the blue view should end. So what's going to happen if I run this code? Well, let's just go ahead and have a look. And it looks like it's just gone and placed it at the origin of its super view, which is not bad. So basically, if you don't give enough information about where you want the view to be, the SDK is just going to choose something arbitrary and place it there. So, okay, so we've got our blue view of 200 by 200. So how do we go and center this? Well, remember previously, in the previous tutorial, I said that this method of definition, it's convenient, but it can't do everything. It can't do everything that you can do by actually defining the constraints like this. There are some limitations, and to my knowledge, there's actually, well, there is a way, but it's a very complicated way of doing it. There isn't an easy way of saying I want this blue view to be centered horizontally or vertically to its super view. So what can we do? Well, luckily, all this is doing is this is just simply a convenience method for generating NSLayoutConstraint objects, which is exactly what we were doing in our previous tutorial up here. So if I cannot find a way to center the blue view, I can simply do what I did in the last tutorial and copy over the center X and center Y constraints and paste it over here. And this should give us a full definition for the layout of the blue view. So I've got the horizontal and vertical constraint, which is basically generating the constraints to say I want the blue view to be 200 in width and 200 in height. And then I've got the center X and Y constraints. And I've created these using the traditional way, which is what I went over in the last tutorial. And this is totally okay. We can get these two methods of definition to work together, because with the SDK, you simply can add the blue view center X constraint and the blue view center Y constraint. And see here the differences are, for the blue view horizontal constraint, I've called add constraints, whereas for the center X constraint, I've only called add constraint. Because with this method of generating the constraint, it's creating a single constraint value, whereas with this method of generating the constraint, it's creating an array of NSLayout constraints. The array might only have one NSLayout constraint object, and it doesn't matter. The thing is, it returns an array, and when it does, we have to add it using the add constraints method as opposed to the add constraint method. So just be careful when you guys do that. You might step up over here. So what is this going to give us? Well, we've defined the 4 constraints for the blue view, so now we should just have the blue view centered onto the screen. So let's go ahead and have a look. And there you have it. You have the blue view of 200 by 200, and it's centered directly to its super view. Okay, so next up, let's go ahead and create the constraints for our red view and add it to the top of this blue view. So let's just go ahead and do that. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, let's just define the width and the height of the red view, very similarly to how we did it for the blue view. Red view 100 and null for the second and third arguments, and passing in the views dictionary. And I'll go ahead and create the vertical constraint. So now I have the horizontal and vertical constraint for the red view, 100 by 100. And basically it's, in the last tutorial, it's these two constraints over here. So let's go ahead and add these constraints to our view hierarchy. Red view horizontal constraint and the red view vertical constraint. So what should this give us? Well, it's saying I want a red view of 100 by 100, but once again we haven't really defined where we wanted it to start or where we wanted it to end. And if the SDK is going to take an arbitrary location and just place it there, I'm going to assume the red view is going to appear over here at the origin point of its super view, and it's going to be 100 in length and 100 in height. So let's go ahead and double check that, just to make sure that what I'm saying is true. And there you have it. So I want the red view to be directly on top of the blue view. So how do we do that? And luckily there is a way with this definition method of doing it, and it's a really elegant and simple way. So see here, I've got the red view vertical constraint and I've got the blue view vertical constraint. Let me just go and refactor this a bit so that it's easier to read. So okay, so I've got the red view vertical constraint, and basically it's saying I want red view of 100, and I've got the blue view vertical constraint, which is a blue view of 200. So how do we get them to sit on top of each other? Well, simply we're just going to combine these two constraints. And how do we do that? Well, let me go ahead and show you. So once again, I'm just doing a little bit of refactoring to make this more easier to read. Okay, so I've got the red view vertical constraint and the blue view vertical constraint, and now I'm going to write the combined constraint. So I'm just going to call this constraint vertical constraint because it's going to have both the red view and the blue view. Constraints with visual format. And basically what I'm going to say here is I'm going to say I want the red view, which is 100. And what's going to come after the red view? Well, it's going to be the blue view. So as simple as that, I just say it's going to be blue view. Pass in null for the metrics and add the view hierarchy. And with this vertical constraint, which is a combination of the red view vertical constraint and the blue view vertical constraint, I don't really need to add these two constraints to the view hierarchy anymore. Instead, I can just add the single constraint. So let me go ahead and do that. Vertical constraint. So with this constraint, I'm saying vertically I want the red view and then I want the blue view, but in this string I haven't really defined where I want the red view and the blue view to start. So what's going to happen? Well, we do have some definition of where we want the blue view to be located, and that's done by these two constraints over here. So this is saying I want the blue view to be centered in the X and Y direction, and this constraint is saying I want the red view to sit above the blue view. So the blue view should still be centered because we've added these two constraints to the view hierarchy, and the red view should sit somewhere above the blue view. So let's go ahead and see if that's true or not. And it is true. I have the red view, and it's sitting somewhere above the blue view, and the blue view is still centered in an X and Y direction. Now you see how there is a little bit of space above the blue view, and that's because we did not define how much space we wanted there to be between the red view and the blue view. And if I did want to define how much space I wanted there to be, that's fine. I can go ahead and say I want 100 spacing, and what this is going to do is it's going to put the red view 100 pixels above the blue view. So let's go ahead and do that. And you see here there is exactly 100 pixels of space between the red and blue view. But if I just did this, there's going to be an arbitrary amount of space every single time, and that's because we haven't told the SDK how much space we wanted there to be, so it's going to choose an arbitrary amount of space for us. In this case, I believe it's 5 pixels. I'm not too sure about that, but I think it's somewhere around that value. So what do we do if we want the red view to sit directly above the blue view? Well, basically that's going to be 0 pixels in space, so I just have to specify 0 over here, and if I show you the result of that, I now have the red view sitting directly above the blue view. So we're getting close. We're getting close to initially what we had. We've got a single vertical constraint, and basically it defines the red and blue view, and it's got 0 pixels in between them, and we've given the height of the red and the blue view. So the last thing we have to do is we have to center the red view to the blue view. And how we did it in the previous method was we used this constraint over here. And what this was said was we want the red view's center X to be equal to the blue view's center X. And is there a way to do this with the visual format definition? And the answer is yes, and it's actually really convenient once again. So remember that this function over here, it takes 4 arguments. The first is a string, the second is options, the third is the metrics, and the fourth is views. Up till now, we haven't said anything about the options, and that's where this centering of the red view is going to come in. We can give this vertical constraint several options, and let's go ahead and explore some of them right now. So if I go ahead and type NSLayout format options, and I bring up the autocomplete, you can see I have a whole list of options of how I want to lay out this constraint. And in this case, so it's a vertical constraint. And basically I want every view in this vertical constraint to have the same center X. So basically all I have to do is choose align all center X. And it's as simple as that. And there you have it. So if I go ahead and run this code right now, I should see exactly what we had before. And as you can see, we have the red view, and we have the blue view, and the red view is centered directly on top of the blue view. Let me go ahead and show you some of these other options. So I have align all, let's say, align all left. And basically what that does is say, it's basically going to say I want the red view's left to be aligned to the blue view's left. So let's go ahead and do that. And as you can see, that's turned out to work out pretty well. What would happen if you do, so previously we had align all center X, but what would happen if I went align all center Y? Well, that doesn't really make sense because I have a vertical constraint, and I can't say vertically I want the red view to have the same center Y as the blue view, because the center Y is horizontal type of constraint definition, and that's not going to work. So what's going to happen if I run this? And you see the app's actually crashed. And it's crashed with a warning message in the console, and it just says that options mask requires views to be aligned on a vertical edge, which is not allowed for layout that is also vertical. And it gives the constraint that you defined, and it says it's basically an illegal constraint, and you're not allowed to do that kind of thing. So it's pretty easy to tell that you've made a mistake. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that use this NSLayout format options. Think about it before you use it, because you can't just put any value in there and expect it to work. And in some cases, it's actually going to crash. So let's just go ahead and change that back to our align all center X and run the code. And there you go. We have our red view, which is directly centered on top of our blue view. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, that's pretty much how you do it. It's pretty straightforward. It's very easy to read, and I don't know about you guys, but I really prefer this method of defining my constraints rather than using interface builder. When I use interface builder to define the constraints, I find myself getting very confused. The bigger the file gets and the more constraints there are, it just gets really confusing with stuff going all over the place. With this method, you can see every single constraint written on a single source file, and it might seem a bit tedious at first, but once you get used to it, it's in my experience at least, it's a lot faster than using interface builder. Another thing with interface builder that I've experienced is it might seem good at first, but when you're working in a large team and you have all these merge conflicts in your repository, and when everybody is trying to edit the same interface builder at the same time, that's just going to cause a lot of headaches and and disaster, really. So I really do prefer this method of defining constraints. Before we finish, there is one other way of writing these constraints. So I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, this is quite convenient, but can we do better? Can we make it even more convenient? And the answer is, well, yeah, kinda. So basically, we've been writing these constraints and we've been writing these strings, and they're pretty easy. But we still don't want to have to, for something as simple as this, we don't want to type out the string every single time, right? So what we can do is we can actually create convenience methods to do this kind of thing for us. And basically what I mean by this is, so I actually have a file here, and basically I've created a list of functions, and they're basically convenience functions to create auto layout constraints. So what I mean, well, let's go ahead and have a look at some of these. So for example, this function over here, center vertically to, and you give it a UI view, and you can say padding. And basically what this does is it's gonna this class, UI view auto layout extension class, it's a category on UI view. And basically what this function does is it's going to say, I want to center the UI view to another UI view. And let's take a look at the implementation. So basically I create a constraint, and I'm saying NSLayoutConstraint, and I want self center Y to be the UI view that I'm passing in to equal to the center Y of that UI view with the padding. So you can see from this list of functions, sometimes I use the traditional method, sometimes I use the visual format definition method. So for example, this one's stretched to width of super view with padding, and basically what this does is it creates a constraint, and it's saying I want to give padding to the left and padding to the right, which is the padding you give here. And then you have item in the center. And what is item? Well, if we have a look at the views dictionary, item is self. So basically, if I call like view.stretch to width of super view and I give it 20 padding, it's basically going to stretch this view to the width of the super view with 20 pixels on the left and right. So I will commit this this source file to my GitHub page, and I'll leave a link to it in the video description, and you guys can have a look and use it or modify it and do whatever you want. But this is my implementation, and I know for a fact that there are other implementations on GitHub. There are several CocoaPod repositories that does this kind of thing, I believe. I just wrote my own because it was pretty simple and easy to do. It's not like one of those big libraries where, you know, it's good to use third party. It's probably still better to use a third party, but I just wrote my own way of doing it just for the sake of it. And to give a demo of how to use my version of the convenience constraints, I'll just go back to the main file. I'm not gonna go step by step coding up what we've done here, but I have, before this tutorial, I have coded up a function that uses the convenience constraints that I've defined. So I'm just going to copy and paste it here, and I will commit this to my GitHub page, and you guys can have a look at it once again. But essentially, what this method is doing is exactly what we did up here and up here, except using the convenience methods that I've defined. So let's just go ahead and do a quick demo. I'll comment out the previous method and call the new method. And if I run this code, we should see exactly the same thing as we've previously seen, which is the blue view and the red view, and they are that's basically what we did before. And if we have a quick read of this, you can see it's a lot shorter than what we did up here or up here. And this is pretty easy to read too. So we set up our views just as we did in our previous methods. And then I just add several constraints to the view hierarchy. So what have we done? Well, let's just have a quick look. So I've basically said south.blueView center horizontally to south. So that's just basically going to center the blue view in the horizontal direction. And then I go blue view center vertically, and that centers it vertically. And then I say blue view constraint height 200, constraint width, and that just gives it a 200 by 200. And now we move on to the red view. So the first thing I say is red view anchored to top of blue view with a padding of 0. So I've got the red view and it's anchored to the top of the blue view and there's no padding. The second thing is red view centered horizontally to blue view. And you can see here I've got the red view centered horizontally to the blue view. And then I've got the red view constrained width and height to 100 by 100, which is what I've done here. We can have a quick play of this. So for example, this is anchored to the top of blue view, padding of 0. So what would happen if I give it a padding of 20? And you can see that it's now 20 pixels above the blue view. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it's been informative and helpful. And leave comments below if you have questions. I know it took quite long to make this video from the first video, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I hope to make some more tutorials in the future, and let me know if there's anything you guys are interested in, and see you guys next time.